Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am Miguel Martinez Ramos from the National University of Autonomous University of Mexico, and I have the pleasure to moderate this lightning session on ecosystem services in the face of global change. We will have the contribution of 8 colleagues from different regions of the planet, each one representing groups of 2 or more persons. I am sure that Jack Koch, Mulish Jamal Musa Hall, Justine Van Hel, Diogo Ferreira, Luke Powell, Maria Hirschfeld, Caterina Cosmopolis de Carpio, and Cynthia Cosette, which are the speakers, will give us a very interesting talks. After the talks, we will have a live question and answer session with the speakers. I would like to remind you that you may submit questions for the speakers at any time during the presentation, but please be sure to do so using the Zoom question and answer button. Not use the function in Cuba, please. Also, please indicate the name of the speaker to whom the question is directed. Okay, please do that. We will have about 30 minutes for the session of question and answers. And without more to add, please start the talks. Javi?
Hi, my name is Jazz, and for the next 5 minutes, I will talk about what drives ecosystem services on degraded rangelands in Lesotho, with implications for evidence-based restoration strategies. Rangelands are important ecosystems, as about 800 million people worldwide depend on these systems for their livelihoods. However, more than a quarter of all rangelands is degraded. To reverse degradation and design targeted restoration strategies, we need to understand the mechanisms underlying rangeland functioning. The use of functional ecology to design restoration strategies is promising, but its application to manage systems is lagging, and non-woody vegetation is understudied. Therefore, here we applied a functional trait approach to woody and non-woody vegetation in degraded rangelands in Lesotho to systematically assess the role of land management and vegetation on the supply of multiple ecosystem services. We used the land degradation surveillance framework to assess 446 plots across 3 sites. We measured 16 functional traits on 49 woody and non-woody species and evaluated 3 ecosystem services and their relative proxies, so that is climate regulation, biodiversity, and soil health. And for management, we looked at the impact of fire and grazing. Then we used mixed effects models, including site as a random factor. Our optimal models revealed the importance of land management and suggest a role for plant functional traits in explaining all 3 services. Now our plots were located along topographic and altitudinal gradients, which were not one-on-one related, as the 3 sites were located at different altitudes, and plots within each site covered a topographic range. Then, starting with climate regulation, above ground woody and non-woody carbon stocks were higher towards bottomlands, and where grazing pressure was higher. Now, this may be explained by species-specific grazing responses, where increaser species are favored by grazers. And indeed, we found a positive association between increaser species and carbon stock. Carbon stocks were also higher in communities with high leaf dry matter content, which is a characteristic of increaser species. Then biodiversity was higher at lower altitudes with many shrubs and low non-woody biomass. Interestingly, many of these shrubs here are invasive species, but diversity is still higher at lower altitudes, as higher altitudes are more vulnerable to grazing. Their overgrazing results in severe soil erosion, leading to decreasing biodiversity and expansion of non-palatable species. Then soil health increases while moving up along the topography and where non-woody and woody vegetation cover was low. Woody vegetation, for a large part, is composed of invasive species, which can contribute to erosion. Then there was also a negative link between soil health and grazing, and to a lesser extent also fire. Finally, soil health was lower at higher altitudes where many tussock grasses occur. Here, tussocks do well under high grazing pressure, maybe due to their low palatability, but they don't contribute to soil health due to their small roots and typical patches of bare soil that you will find in between these tussocks. Then finally, combining all the results, it is clear that grazing is a major driver of the system, favoring species that do well under grazing, leading to soil erosion and a general decline of ecosystem services. While avoiding overgrazing is an obvious but important recommendation, it is necessary to implement this while also removing invasive species and promoting non-tussock species to enhance multiple ecosystem services at the same time. Then to conclude, our results reveal many relations between ecosystem services, land management, and vegetation, with an important role for plant functional traits such as growth form. Considering all these elements and their interactions is essential to design effective restoration strategies. On those rangelands, reducing grazing pressure, removing invasive species, and stimulating non-tussock species should be prioritized for effectively restoring carbon, stocks, biodiversity, and soil health. I thank you for your attention.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamal, a PhD student at the Department of Zoology, University of Oxford. Today I'm going to talk about my research on sustaining ecosystem services of tropical forests under agricultural expansion. My research geographically focused on the nature reserve in Sulawesi Island, which is one of the global biodiversity hotspots in Indonesia. In this research, I particularly concerned on how to sustain tropical forests from small-scale seasonal crop farmland. In this case, it's corn farmland, because most of the farmlands in the tropical region are owned by smallholder farmers and they are living below poverty line. In addition, planting in polyculture often makes agricultural land more sustainable, but this system is less applicable to seasonal crops, making this particular type of crop is more vulnerable to the crop failure. Combination between the need to maintain the livelihood and crop failure events often motivates smallholder farmers to expand their agricultural land, reducing the tropical forest cover. At the same time, tropical forests are proven to be beneficial to the perennial crops such as oil palm, cacao, and coffee. However, its ecosystem function provision to the adjacent small-scale seasonal crops remains understudied. Here I focused on addressing some causes of the crop failures, which are soil infertility and pest outbreak. Ecosystem services that are linked to these two problems are soil fertility maintenance and pest control service that could be indicated by the decomposition rate and predation of the herbivorous insects, respectively. So first, I assessed the impact of the habitat modification on ecosystem functions by measuring litter and cellulose decomposition, as well as caterpillar predation in 3 different habitats. I found that tropical forests provide the highest decomposition and predation rate. These ecosystem functions were dominantly regulated by invertebrate communities. Among invertebrate groups that are involved in the decomposition process, I found that millipedes are abundant in my study site, where its presence could improve up to 25% of the decomposition. In addition, ecological research of millipedes in the tropics is lacking. Therefore, I decided to investigate further on the role of millipedes and other litter invertebrates on maintaining decomposition process under changing environment. Using field experimental approach, I found that millipedes are important in maintaining decomposition, especially under drought condition. And millipedes have synergistic interactions with other litter invertebrates, meaning that the more diverse invertebrate community, the higher decomposition rate. I also investigated the ecosystem functions to be a practical solutions on land use conflict, but in assessing how ecosystem functions differ across distance gradient from forest to the farmland, I found that ecosystem service responses are idiosyncratic. In this case, decomposition is forest dependent, while caterpillar predation is forest dependent. Because decomposition is forest dependent, I tested the effectiveness of the use of natural nutrient sources to improve soil fertility and the crop yield. And I found that natural organic matters such as crop litter, shrub litter, and male pits fecal pellet could produce equal crop yields to those that are exposed by the fertilizers and other chemicals, meaning that it can be a cheaper option to maintain soil fertility, and also it's more environmentally friendly. Meanwhile, because pest control service is forest dependent, I compared the ecosystem services provided by the primary forest and the naturally regenerated forest. And I found that forest regeneration could also recover the ecosystem services, particularly pest control service. To sum up, even small-scale agricultural areas adjacent to the forest fragments could experience impaired ecosystem functions, raising the need to sustain this kind of agriculture. And then protection and restoration of tropical forests could both maintain and recover ecosystem functions that could benefit smallholder farmers to sustain their small-scale agriculture. It can also prevent crop failure, as well as preventing from the agricultural expansion. Therefore, ecosystem services could be keys in sustaining tropical forests and agriculture at the same time. And thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, welcome to this lightning talk about cacao pollination services. I am Justine van Singel. I am a doctoral researcher at the University of Würzburg in Germany. And with this poster, I want to present some of the results from the BIF Cacao project. It's a project led by Biodiversity International, and it studies several aspects of diversity and cacao agroforestry. In cacao, pollination is crucial to fruit production. Insects visit flowers, they deposit pollen, and as such, they aid a fruit set of cacao. But there are also several knowledge gaps that limit our ability to improve productivity and livelihoods of small-scale cacao farmers. This is especially true in regions of origin of the crop, such as Peru. For example, visitation rates of flower visitors or potential pollinators are unknown, and it's unknown how this alters with forest proximity or shade cover. Next to that, it is also unknown how much pollen is needed for a successful fruit set, and whether hand pollination can be a viable alternative for mitigating fruit set limitations. Here, we studied how to improve flower visitation and fruit set. We addressed 3 different questions, and we did so with 3 different strategies. So first of all, to study how visitation rates are affected by forest proximity and shade cover, we sampled flower visitors with insect sticky glue, as you can see here, and on the right yellow picture. Next to that, we wanted to study how much pollen needs to be deposited for a successful fruit set. To do so, we took photographs with the ultra macro lens and counted the pollen from these photographs, as you can see on the red picture here. We also conducted hand pollination experiments and monitored thousands of flowers and whether they had set fruit after hand pollinating them. So first of all, we found that visitation rates can be improved by shade cover in the case of all flower visitors and by forest proximity in the case of trips. But these patterns were only found in one of the regions that we have studied. This is the northern dry region in yellow on the graphs. We have also found that a pollen threshold of over 130 grains is necessary for an optimal fruit set, in the cacao we studied. And we have also found that after hand pollinating flowers, fruit set increases from 2 to 7%. From these findings, we can draw several different conclusions. So first, we find that because forest proximity and shade cover can improve flower visitation, but only in one region, that regionally adapted management will be necessary for an optimized flower visitation and flower visitation rates. The pollen threshold that we found underpins the importance of large amounts of pollen that are needed for fruit set. And last but not least, we found that hand pollination can improve fruit set, but the fruit set remains low. Therefore, we argue that managing natural pollinators will be a more feasible strategy to improve cacao pollination services. So overall, regionally adapted management plans will be necessary, and these plans will need to target visitors that deposit large amounts of pollen in order to improve fruit set of cacao and improve livelihoods of small-scale farmers associated with cacao in Peru. Thank you so much for listening to this poster talk. If you want to know more, if you want to discuss or ask questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us either by email or on Twitter. You can also visit our website. You can find this here in the right corner of the poster, or you can just simply scan the QR code that brings you to our website in case you want to know more. Carolina Ocampo Ariza will also be giving a presentation on Thursday. It will be available in session 1 agroforestry on the 22nd of July. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Diogo, and I'm here today to talk about bats, birds, and ecosystem service in cacao plantations. You may be wondering why cacao, but we all know the answer. Chocolate is good and make us feel happy. But it's not only that, of course. Cacao had a global expansion of more than 50% since the last decade. It represents an amazing 87 billion euros annually in global trade, and although most of cacao comes from Africa, 70%, no study so far focus on the two groups and their ecosystem service in this part of the world. Also, in this area of the world, in Africa, the brown cap seed is the main cacao pest, and it can cause losses of more than 400,000 million euros annually. We know from other areas of the world that bats and birds can be the answer to this problem. In Indonesia, they save farmers in cacao plantations an amazing 621 euros per hectare annually. In our study area in Cameroon, we found the brown capsid, the main pest, in a diet of 6 bird species and in a diet of 12 bird species. With all of this in mind, we decide then to quantify the effects of birds and bats on cacao production. Mainly, we want to see what is happening to the pest and arthropod abundance, to the pest damage and disease, and to cacao yield. So to answer these objectives, we select 8 farms spread across Cameroon, mostly in central Cameroon, and we start building a cage around cacao trees to block the access of bats and birds. In the end, we had 2 of these enclosures, as you can see in the GIF, in each farm, and we had 2 controls where bats and birds can feed freely on the insects and on the pests that are present in the trees. Then, Alan, our entomologist, went to these farms once per month to quantify the arthropod populations, count number of pods, flowers, measure the beavery, and the post-pod damage. After collecting all this data, we end up doing a general linear mix model to see how these variables would respond to the presence and absence of bats and birds. So we found out that Phytophagous arthropods were less abundant in controls, meaning that when bats and birds are present, the population of these insects decreases. And here we can see that Hemiptera, one of the main Phytophagous arthropods in our cacao farms, had a different, significant difference, being more abundant in exclosures, and the same is also true for mealybugs. That is a secondary pest that causes losses also of hundreds of millions in cacao farms across the world. The problem was that we also found the same patterns for arachnidia and Montodia, meaning that predatory arthropods also decrease in abundance when bats and birds are present. The same was true, unfortunately, for potential pollinators like the order Diptera. We also found less insects of this order in controls, meaning that although bats and birds are doing a service by reducing the Phytophagous arthropod abundance, they are doing a disservice by decreasing the potential pollinators and the predatory arthropods. And the question now is, do these service outweigh the disservice that bats and birds are doing in cacao plantations? And the question to this is yes. Although the number of flowers did not change between controls and exclosures, the number of pods was always higher in controls versus exclosures. In the end, we had almost more 30% of big and medium pods, the ones that can be harvested, in controls when compared with exclosures. So this means that bats and birds are potentially increasing the number of pods through pest consumption. And now what we want to know is if this consumption, if this increasing number of pods correlates with the pod damage and or herbivory. And then we want to translate this increasing number of pods to money. So basically we want to put the price on the menu. And for that, we need to still quantify how much of the weight of the dry beans, basically this thing that is sold that is inside of the pods. We hope that after collecting all the pods and dry out the weight, we be able to put a price on menu and quantify the effect of bats and birds on cacao production. I want to thank you for listening to me. I want to thank you especially to the amazing team that was with me in the field, and especially to Alan, that it was the entomologist that spent the 12 months doing the arthropod monitoring. Without him, nothing of this would be possible. Thank you so much, and feel free to ask anything.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Luke L. Powell, and I'm going to tell you about the birds and bats that provide ecosystem services in Cameroonian cocoa. So Africa is a particularly important place to work right now because the human population of Africa is going to quadruple by the end of the century. The rest of the world is basically leveling off, but Africa is going to increase enormously in human population, which is going to have profound effects on natural resources, including tropical rainforest. Now, this is a Samba Christian in Ibec, Cameroon, and his large family. And essentially, they're immersed in their environment, which is a cocoa farm. So you could imagine that a nature-based, that is non-pesticide-based pest control method and way of farming would be much more sustainable and beneficial to the farmers' health, their wallets, and the ecosystem as a whole. And it's important to put in context, too, that most of deforestation in Africa is driven by small-scale farming, like Asombas. So we need to be able to understand how to manage those systems sustainably going forward. And to look at this, we focused on insectivorous birds and bats, like these lovely specimens here. And we're noting here that the important context is that $500 million annually in damage is caused by pests and disease in cocoa. And that brown capsids, that's the hemipteran on the right, are causing a large portion of these losses. So to get at this with a fine-tooth comb, we employed a pretty new technique called DNA metabarcoding. Basically, we collect lots of bird and bat feces in cocoa farms. We extract the DNA, sequence it, and that tells us which birds and bats consumed which pests and generally which arthropods. And we found really strong evidence that 6 bats and 12 birds eat the primary pest in cocoa, the brown capsids. Many of them eat other capsids as well. That's the blue lines. And they eat many other pests as well. So clearly there's evidence that they're affecting the system. And so to really quantify the economic value of that, we employed an exclusion experiment. So this here is basically a a cage with fishing net around a cocoa tree. That's the exclosure shown on the left that keeps birds and bats out of it. And then we compare the ecosystem and the savings between that and control trees that have birds and bats like they would naturally. And we find that in the top center, the hemipterans, the true bugs, when you cover up the cocoa trees and exclude the birds and bats, that's the yellow triangles, there's about twofold increase in hemipterans, and there's about a sixfold increase in mealybugs. So clearly they're affecting the ecosystem. And what farmers want to know is, does it save me money? And it does. So when you exclude birds and bats in the exclosure, you lose 27% of your cocoa pods. So big time savings, which is going to result in many hundreds of dollars per hectare per year in savings as we work through those details. Ultimately, what we want to do with this is build a Bayesian community model here. This is what Corinne Jarrett, my PhD student, is doing, where she understands the interactions between the trophic levels, various organisms in these three trophic levels, cocoa trees, pests of various kinds, and the insectivores, and just tries to understand the relationship between them so that we could then predict what the win-win scenarios would be and work towards managing for those. And Melanie Chumbo on the ground is working with farmers directly to educate them about the value of ecosystem services and help them to manage their farms in such a way. And so that Asomba and his family are then immersed in a sustainable system where they have a very diverse system, and ultimately one that produces high yield of cocoa for their families, and avoids the insect apocalypse that's happening in industrial systems elsewhere. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all the people that have helped me along the way. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Hirschfeld. I'm PhD student at the Universidad Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. And I will present and briefly share with you some results and insights of research developed in the last year related to the social and environmental impact generated by the COVID pandemic. So we carry out a critical review of several primary studies about the COVID pandemic from July 2020 to March 2021. We considered research articles published in Web Science and Redalytics database with a focus on articles in the area of conservation science and humanities, with the aim of understanding the synergistic effects between social and environmental dimension and how are the conflicts distributed in the global space. So as a result, in summary, we characterize two moments of the pandemic. In the first, between March and May 2020, also called the anthropopause, the lockdown and the pause in industrial and commercial activities around the world led to a drop in air pollution and air, land, and water traffic. So many studies addresses this issue and discuss the impact of sudden falls in human activities on the environment and biodiversity. On the other hand, a second moment of the pandemic is characterized by more negative than positive effects. So food insecurity, social inequalities, and structural violence increase, as well as illegal extractivism, deforestation, pollution, and poaching. So although the consequences vary from place to place, the distribution of conflict evidence a pattern that highlights that biodiversity conservation is intrinsically linked to socioeconomic structures, and that we need an interdisciplinary perspective to understand and act on a so complex event. So in view of this, we propose to understand the pandemic through world system theory proposed by Wallerstein, as it allows us to explain and understand the current crisis in its relation of domination, exploitation, and conflict, and in its social and environmental spheres. So this approach understands that social systems are complex historical systems that represent an integrated network of cultural, economic, social, and political processes that on the one hand have their dynamics and capacity for differentiation, but on the other hand are united by process and structured in a global level. So the world system theory also defines a world economy structured by historical relation of dependency and socioeconomic inequality between North and Global South. Thus, the epistemological characteristics are globality, historicity, totalism, and interdisciplinarity. So based on this, we propose that environmental systems as well as social systems can be defined by the globality of their interactions and by the totality of their structure, since they are systems that have their own characteristics at the local scale, but are united by process on a global scale, by the historicity of the process that configure its structure, and for the interdisciplinarity that requires its understanding. So these epistemological characteristics are important of highlight because on the one hand, the impact of the pandemic has not been the same for everyone. Inequality shapes effects on social phenomena on the environment. And on the other hand, because this permits understand the spatial pattern of conflict generated by the pandemic. So even the consequences vary geographically and the environment impacts of COVID have been felt on various spatial scales. Throughout the world, the pattern is repeats. The most vulnerable socioeconomic population were the most affected. Therefore, also there are ecological, political, and cultural differences between localities. There is a common historical picture of inequality and dependence between the countries of the North and South. As a result, ecological systems are therefore interconnected with social systems in a totality that is the planet, and then we can define COVID pandemic as an emergent phenomenon of the nature-society relationship of the world system. So finally, we have more and more information, and there are several proposals for post-pandemic action that focus on environmental issues and importance of biodiversity conservation. So this approach cannot forget that the society-nature relationship evidenced by the pandemic, as well as the global asymmetric relationship to think about solution. The world system theory is an example of an approach that help us understand the historical issues of conservation system. And finally, I want to highlight the need to move towards critical conservation science. So thank you for your attention, and I wait for the questions.
Hi, today I will be presenting some work from the integration project of the Colombian Bioresources Program. So the work is still in its preliminary phase, and so these results are still exploratory, and I'll be happy to hear any comments or suggestions you may have at the end of the presentation. Colombia is one of the most mega-diverse countries and home to over 51 million people. In 2016, a peace agreement was signed by the Colombian government and the rebel group, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC in the Spanish acronym, ending over half a century of civil war. Now, over 50 years of internal armed conflict has led to environmental and socio-economical impacts. For example, before the peace agreement, FARC controlled territories limiting access to forested lands and reduced land use activities such as agriculture and petroleum extraction. On the other hand, FARC were also involved in activities that had detrimental impacts on forests, such as cultivating coca crops and land grabbing. So Colombia now faces new challenges from increased access to forests and changing land use, with further implications on ecosystems and socioeconomic factors. The Colombian government would need to address these challenges if it is to achieve sustainable development and post-conflict recovery. Now here I will show a part of our exploratory results on correlating conflict and hotspots of risk, specifically in terms of biodiversity and forest loss. The conflict data was obtained from the Fundación Paz y Reconciliación, which included intensities in each municipality of high, medium, low, and no conflict. The data for biodiversity was based on IUCN and BirdLife International data, encompassing species richness of birds, amphibians, and mammals. The forest loss data was obtained from the Hanson Global Forest Change dataset across the years 2001 to 2020. So we find that areas with conflict and higher conflict intensities have higher species diversity. So the figure here shows the mean number of species in each municipality against the presence or absence of conflict, and conflict intensities of high, medium, and low intensities. We see here that in areas where conflict is present, there is higher species diversity compared to areas that have never experienced conflict. And then breaking conflict's presence down into the different intensities, we see more species in areas with high conflict intensity compared to low intensity. Now, this could be due to deforestation, tending to be lower in areas of high conflict as found in previous studies. And this was said to be because of restricted access to forests, which were within FARC-controlled territories. However, after the peace agreement, previous studies have shown that deforestation increases due to activities such as agricultural expansion and land grabbing practices. So here we show that forest loss changes with conflict intensity and the year that it occurred in. The figure here shows the proportion of forest loss across the years from 2001 to 2020 and across the different intensities such as high, medium, low, and no conflict. So before the 2016 peace agreement, on the left side of the dashed line, forest loss levels are similar between the conflict intensities. After the peace agreement, on the right side of the dashed line, we see a spike in deforestation, and areas with high intensity seem to experience the highest levels of deforestation. We then look at the links between conflict, biodiversity, and forest loss. Here we have mean number of species per municipality against the proportion of total forest loss across the years 2001 to 2020, and against conflict intensities high, medium, low, and no conflict. We find that forest loss has a slight positive effect on species and that there is an interaction between forest loss and conflict intensity. Now, when taken all together, the results here suggest that in areas of high conflict intensities, there are more species and also more deforestation. I would first like to caution that we need to consider here that the biodiversity data was from 2018, so there is no before and after peace agreement comparison, and that species richness can be inflated in areas with degraded forests, where generalist species invade these habitats, causing an influx in species numbers. I would thus like to further unpick these patterns by looking at the loss of species ranges before and after the peace agreement and under different conflict intensities. For example, how it would affect endemic species. Furthermore, I would like to explore the trends shown in other ecosystem benefits, such as carbon storage and hydrological services, and then to explore the links between land cover, socioeconomic factors, and these multiple benefits. And finally, I would like to identify high-risk areas where funding or interventions should be invested to improve multiple ecosystem benefits and socioeconomic factors. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Hello. Now we are in the session of question and answers, and I have some here that some of them have been already answered by the presenters, but I would like to repeat some of them for Diogo and Luke. There is a question about, let's see, how long have you followed your study system? This question is important because, as you know, the pests, mostly insects and microbes, tend to have fluctuations around time, and that it's important to follow these dynamics in order to assess the really role of the birds and bats as controllers of the pests. Do you have some idea, some answer to this question? Luke or Diogo?
Sure, I'll handle this question, and it's a good one. There are a very strong seasonal dynamics in this part of the world. There's a wet season and alternating more or less with a dry season. So we try to space our study across 3 years alternating wet, dry, and we tried to make sure that we timed the dry season with the peak of the brown capsid activity. That's the main pest. So we had very strong sort of temporal effects across the season that are really important to work across. I think we could probably benefit from even finer resolution on the temporal scale, so that as monthly visits, I think would have been even more advantageous. The study that Diogo highlighted, the exclusion experiment, did have monthly visits, and we had really fine scale changes in arthropod abundances and other ecological dynamics. The other study with metabarcoding was just twice a year because of the cost is prohibitive. But if we had gone even finer, I think we would have continue to figure out that sort of fine precision ecological interactions. A great question, and something we'd like to definitely pursue.
Okay, thank you. Diogo?
Yeah, for some reason I can't turn on my video. I don't know why.
Okay.
Yeah, but basically Luke just answered the question. And okay. And regarding the exclusion experiment, because we followed for 1 full year, so we encompass all the seasonality difference. But because it's hard to go to Cameroon and sample bats and birds, we could only divide that like twice per year and just encompass the main dry season and wet season.
Okay. Yes, I think that it's important also to follow this kind of studies between years, no, in order to catch these interactions in longer terms. Thank you. And I have a question for Maria. I don't have the name of the person that is making the question. The question is, are there any preliminary data on whether COVID has a net positive or negative effect overall, or on any component of social effects? Microphone, please. Not yet. Or maybe I can ask to Katerina a question while you fix the sound problem. Katerina, this is a question from Rebecca Oliva. And this is very interesting, your presentation. The question is, are you continuing this project? And how do you think this conclusion will apply to other South American countries?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for the question. Yes, this is just a preliminary result from my PhD project. It's just the first chapter. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we'll continue with this. My model is, well, it's fit to the Peruvian Amazon. And the results, yeah, I think that it is like a first step to understand the relationship between forest and poverty to other countries in South America. But we also have to take into account that poverty is it's very particular. Like the causes of poverty are very particular to each country, and also the causes of deforestation. So yeah, this is a first step. I think that it could give some guidance. Maybe they could use the same methodology, just adapted to their realities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I will select the question for different speakers, no, not to concentrate on just one. And the next question is Marie-Lee Bourdeau, and it's for Cindy. In your research, have you viewed cattle raising as a critical factor in post-conflict deforestation, perhaps more important than illicit crops?
Hi, thanks for the question. So I think I'd definitely like to look at the changing land uses pre and post peace agreement. I would say that based on past studies, they have shown that the drivers of deforestation does vary across the different regions. So I couldn't really say for sure which is more important at the moment, but I do know that they do vary across different regions.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Jazz. Hi, Jazz. You say that one important actions to restore these areas you are studying is reducing invasive species, no? It's very important. But my question is, do you have some studies or some projects of how to reduce, eliminate such species in your system?
Yeah, hi Miguel, thank you for your question. So currently in Lesotho, there are already some restoration efforts underway to reduce the invasive species. They've basically two methods. They do, the government collaborates with local communities to do manual uprooting of the species. And then recently they are also running a trial to work with high density grazing. So here they work with exclosures that they call kralings. And basically they will include all the cattle, all the livestock, mainly the sheep and the goat, in these exclosures, and then move these exclosures along the landscape. This trial started 2 years ago. They're still monitoring to see what the effects are of using these methods to reduce the invasive species.
And are you including some economic analysis of how much will cost this kind of management?
No, I did not. In my research, I did not look at the economical consequences of this. I actually don't know if they're doing this with these tests, because these tests are run by the government themselves. So yeah, no, I don't know what the effects are of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there is many questions for other people, but I will ask to Muklish. You say that the small-scale crop farming is a good land use practice in order to maintain the regeneration or regen capacity of the forest. But my question is, there is a socio-economical basis that can sustain this kind of land use in your study region? Muklish?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think so, yeah, there is social economic factors that could help the smallholder farmers to improve the sustainability of their land, because basically they, by kind of diversifying or by planting, by restoring some areas, by combining agroforestry system along in the border of the cropland, that could also improve the like the income of the farmers. So part of the main crop, which is corn.
Okay. Yes, this is very, very important and very good. Thank you. And for Katerina, there is a question also, but I don't know the name of the person that did this question. Are you continuing your project? And how do you think this conclusion that you have now from your study could apply to other South American countries?
Yeah, I think that you also read that question already.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Justin, I will ask you also. From your study, could you say us possible causes of the variation in flower visitation among regions in cacao pollination? Because you say that only one site was related to the forest cover and so on. But I wonder what is the possible factor affecting the variability among regions in flower visitation. Do you have an idea?
I think something that has to do, or something that is causing this effect, is the different climate. in the two regions that we've studied. So, for example, the effect of shade trees, it's stronger in dry regions because there the impact of cooler temperatures and more moist and humid conditions in the farms have a bigger impact, or the difference is bigger between shaded and non-shaded agroforest, whereas in the southern regions, I think the impact was less because of the more permanent and less extreme conditions. That's what we are thinking.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because there is complex factors, no, involved in this variability, and could be very interesting to know some of them. Okay, thank you. Okay. For Cindy, I have a question from Giovanni Duran. It's a part of the direct effect of deforestation, that is the loss of plant species. Which fauna group are being more affected after the peace agreement?
Hi, so at this point, I can't really say which group specifically is more affected by conflict. However, I do, like, for carrying on from this work, I would like to actually identify how, and different like groups, so mammals or amphibians or birds or different endemic species, which ones are actually more affected by the pre and post peace agreement. So I'll let you know in the future once the results come out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I think that this question is for Luke and Diogo. It's from Sarah Servon. And the question is, do you have any ideas of whether bats or birds were bigger predators of pet species overall? Also, how were you able to collect species in specific phases in large quantity?
Yes, so far we don't have information if it's bats or birds preying more on the pest. So the exclusion experiment is a full exclusion, meaning that we cannot separate the impacts of bats and birds. But then based on the metavar coding, we can ID the species that are eating the pest. Although then it's hard to quantify based on the DNA that we got, which one is eating more pest. So, but ideally, when we were able to metavar code all the feces that we collect, because we have like tons of feces from different bats and bird species, we hope to be able to ID what are the species that are doing the most consumption of the pest. But that is still an ongoing analysis. So we hope by the end of my PhD and the end of this project, we'll be able to pinpoint the right species that are doing this service.
Okay. Luke, do you have some ideas about this?
This question has been covered a bit in the chat, but I do want to add to Diogo's answer related to Bea Massa's question and the first question as well, that what I think we're missing is the link between the proof that these animals are eating pests and how to manage to increase abundances of these animals and actually help the farmers yield and income and well-being. That really understanding the mechanistic nature of how, so for example, which shade tree should the farmers plant to bring the insectivorous birds and bats into their system? Does that actually work? We don't have the answers to these questions, and I think not just in cacao, but in most agroforestry systems. In fact, I've not seen anyone to really prove that link. So to me, that's really the next step, and that's what I'd be pushing for in our future work.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And for Cindy, Carolina Ocampo, there have been several new surveys in areas of Colombia that were previously affected by violence and were inaccessible before. Have you included those new discoveries in your data or consider collaboration with Colombian researchers involved in this?
So yeah, at the moment, because the results are still, everything's a bit exploratory at the moment. So I would definitely like to include all these new discoveries. So the results that I've shown actually have not included discoveries. They're just based on IUCN and BirdLife international data that are currently available. And yes, we are actually going to have talks with some Colombian researchers, especially at the Humboldt Institute. And we have Dunia Orego from Exeter, who is a Colombian, but definitely we will be reaching out to the institutions shortly.
Okay, thank you. And Carolina also asked to look at Diogo. How are your results related? It wasn't clear to me if you are saying specifically decreases or increases or unstable abundance of the bat species that consume pests inside the agroforest. There are some relations in your studies? Or what?
I think we're both struggling to understand the question at the same time. That's why neither one of us is answering here. I think we'll chat with Carolina about this one later in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And Diogo, the same?
The same. I was trying to read the question in the chat, but I was not totally getting it. Okay,
let's now to have a brainstorm, because we have only like 6-7 minutes to end the session, and by putting a broad question, no? For all of us. The question is how we can interlink the local, regional, and global efforts to progress in understanding these effects of the global change on ecosystem functions. We are trying to conduct, for example, disciplinary research, like all of you are doing, or in other cases, multidisciplinary research, and also interdisciplinary research, no? When you have a focus on some problem, but a collaborative effort from academics from different disciplines go together from the same framework in order to advance in understanding the problem and provide some incidents on the problem. But also there is a transdisciplinary approach, no? Where you have the participation of people working outside the academia. And what do you think? How can we progress and to face these problems of global change in ecosystem services? Do you have some ideas or experiences that you can share in this space?
I could add something here on the case of Lesotho. What I found when I was in Lesotho is that I think a major determinant of the decline of ecosystem services in these rangelands is that almost all of the land in Lesotho is communally owned. So you have a classic example of a tragedy of the common goods. And I think definitely in these kind of landscapes, it's very important to include the local people, the local communities, because they have certain structures with the chiefs where they decide how to divide the land, how the land is rotated over the seasons. And I think, apart from overgrazing itself or fire, it's really these social structures that play a major role in the quality of the supply of the ecosystem services. So I think definitely on community land, community owned lands, it's very important to have this transdisciplinary research, like you were saying, Miguel.
Okay, very good, thank you. Other comments, ideas?
Well, I guess generally speaking, I think we're missing a link between the research and understanding and quantifying ecosystem services, which is like now seems to be pervasive, which is great. So I think probably most of us inherently value nature because it's incredible. But the greater population doesn't necessarily have this, so we have to put a dollar sign on these things, as Diogo eloquently putting a price on the menu. But now and there's also lots of money from foundations and whatnot, and governments to work with farmers and other people on the ground directly. But those two aren't linked very well. So we do research on, often 2-year, 3-year timescales, myself included, to understand these ecosystem services, and we publish an article. And then there's lots of organizations on the ground, NGOs, et cetera, working with farmers. Okay, do your work like this, and their stuff aren't really based on the best available science, generally speaking. And so linking these two together, really understanding the mechanisms for how ecosystem services work, understanding functional traits, et cetera, that generate kind of win-win scenarios for biodiversity, for farmers as well, and then implementing that on the ground. That link really needs to be what happens going forward, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Yes, because we try to do the best science, we try to have the best publishing papers and books and so on. But the information that we have produced, I think that is very valuable in the science ground, often doesn't go to the practice, to the incidents. And for that, we need to have collaboration with people from different arenas, the people that have skills to communicate with people, the people that translate their knowledge to the academics, and also the people that manage economy, and the politics. And this, I think that our group of biologists or scientists need to grow in order to have more tools and skills to communicate between other sectors and actors in order to progress in this understanding of how to collaborate with the society to solve these problems that we are discussing in this session. But I think that all of you are having very good contributions in this occasion, and I thank you very much, all of you, because on the scientific contribution is very high. And I think that in the next meetings, I think that we need to include people working in the other arenas in order to complement our work. Then thank you very much, all of you. I think that was a very nice, wonderful session, and all is recorded, and then you can return to see this presentation in next time. But please, if you want to continue the discussion, use the HUBA communication tools, and see you around, maybe next year in Colombia, hopefully, in Cartagena. Thank you very much. I want to finish now the session. Hugs o abrazos. Adiós.